For 3,000 years, this was the most fought-over kitchen on earth. Hittites, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Ottomans, every empire that ever mattered tried to set its table here. The land grew its own wheat, its own olives, its own fruit, 2 seas full of fish, and the spice road of the whole planet ran straight through its bazaars. Today, it's the world's 17th largest economy, 88 million people, and a currency that once had to drop 6 zeros just to fit on a banknote. A kitchen so rich the whole world tried to eat from it. So how did the cooks end up paying rent to their own guests? Turkiye, 88 million people sitting on top of 2 continents at once, Asia on one side, Europe on the other, and a single ribbon of water between them that every ship between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean has to squeeze through. And the land behind it feeds itself. Wheat from the Anatolian plateau, olives and figs from the Aegean, hazelnuts from the Black Sea coast, tea from the eastern mountains. 7 climates in one country. There's almost nothing this kitchen has to import to set its own table. And it isn't just fertile, it's almost unfairly beautiful. Fairy chimneys you can sleep inside, white stone terraces like frozen waterfalls, underground cities, turquoise coves, ruins on half the hills. Here, you don't visit history, you trip over it. And the layers go all the way down. In the southeast, hunter-gatherers raised stone pillars at Göbekli Tepe 12,000 years ago. Older than farming, older than writing, 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. The oldest temple ever found. Civilization didn't pass through Anatolia. It practically started here. Which is why, today, the world still shows up to eat. More than 60 million visitors a year. Only France, Spain, and the United States draw more. The 4th most visited country on Earth. 22 World Heritage Sites. Some come for the ruins. Over 1 million a year come for something else. They fly in and fly home days later with a brand new hairline. The empire that once fed the world now quietly refoliates it. For 3,000 years, everyone fought over this kitchen. Now, everyone just wants a seat at the table. And after the first builders came everyone. Hittites who rivaled ancient Egypt, Lydians who minted the world's first coins, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and for 1,000 years, the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire. They all wanted the same thing. Whoever held this land held the road between east and west, and the kitchen that fed it. The richest table on earth comes with the longest guest list. Today on Salted Earth, Türkiye, the richest kitchen in history, and the long, strange story of how the cooks lost control of the recipe. And every recipe has one secret ingredient. Türkiye's is still blank on the card. We'll fill it in at the end. For centuries, the prize at the center of it all was one city, Constantinople, the greatest walled city in the world, capital of a 1,000-year empire. Everyone had tried to take it. Everyone had failed. Then, in 1453, a 21-year-old sultan named Mehmed showed up with the biggest cannon anyone had ever seen. When a great iron chain blocked his fleet from the harbor, Mehmed did something nobody expected. Overnight, he had 70 ships dragged over a hill on greased logs, sailing across dry land into the Golden Horn. A Byzantine eyewitness wrote it was like ships sailing over the land. The 1,000-year empire was over, and Constantinople was the new Ottoman capital. A century later, under Süleyman, the one Europe called the Magnificent, the empire stretched across 3 continents, from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, one of the most powerful states on the planet. And you could measure that power in its kitchen. 10 domed kitchens, smoke rising over the Bosphorus, feeding an entire empire from a single hill. This is the kitchen that gave us baklava, but outside the palace walls, the real engine ran in the bazaars. Mehmed built the Grand Bazaar in 1461, 4,000 shops under one roof, still trading today. Down the hill, the Spice Bazaar handled the cinnamon, the pepper, the saffron flowing in from the east. If you wanted the flavors of Asia in Europe, you bought them here. This city wasn't just rich, it was the cash register the whole world paid into. So here's the puzzle: the most fertile land, the busiest trade road, the richest kitchen in history. Everything a country could need to stay on top forever. And yet, over the next few centuries, the wealth quietly drained away. How do you go broke owning the best table in the world? It started with a road. For 1,000 years, the spices of the East reached Europe overland, and the tolls were collected right here. Then Europe found a sea route to India, around the bottom of Africa, and the spice trade began sailing around the kitchen instead of through it. The world found a back door and stopped paying at the front. Then there was the matter of who got to cook. At the empire's peak, Süleyman handed France a generous deal. French merchants could trade inside the empire almost tax-free, under their own laws. They were called the capitulations, a flex, a superpower being gracious to a smaller friend. But the deal never expired. As Europe rose and the empire faded, every great power demanded the same terms, until foreign merchants could undercut local makers in their own markets. The house had invited the guests to cook and forgotten to take the kitchen back. By the 1800s, the empire that once fed the world ran on borrowed money. War after war, falling revenue, loans to cover the gap, then more loans to pay off the first ones. Europe had a nickname for it: the sick man of Europe. A diagnosis that doubled as an invitation. And in 1881, it reached the logical conclusion. To handle the debt, European creditors set up an institution to collect Ottoman taxes directly, the Public Debt Administration. At its height, the foreign agency collecting the taxes was bigger than the government collecting them. The guests weren't just cooking in the kitchen anymore. They were running the till. None of this happened because the kitchen ran out of ingredients. The land was still fertile. The cooks were still brilliant. It happened deal by deal, war by war. The people who set the prices and kept the books were increasingly somebody else. A kitchen can be the richest in the world and still go broke if it lets everyone but itself write the recipe. But empires are the boring part. The real Türkiye is on a tray of tea. Turks drink more tea per person than anyone else on earth. Small, tulip-shaped glasses all day, everywhere. Sad? Tea. Happy? Tea. A guest, an argument, a deal, a funeral? Tea. The country's answer to almost every human situation. Here's the joke, though. This ancient tradition is barely older than your grandmother. The first tea seedlings went into the ground near Rize in 1924. The most Turkish thing in the world is about 90 years old, and nobody cares because it works. And the coffee it replaced never really left. There's an old saying here: a single cup of coffee is worth 40 years of friendship. You don't drink it to wake up, you drink it to sit down with somebody. And then there are the animals. Istanbul is run by cats. They sleep in mosque courtyards, on shop counters, on cafe chairs you were about to sit in. Nobody owns them, and everybody feeds them. Food bowls and cardboard houses on half the streets in the city. But it goes further than cats. Dial 153 and the city sends a real ambulance to pick up a hurt street animal, treat it for free, and carry it back to the corner it came from. Not just cats and dogs, the birds, the wildlife. And yes, somewhere in this country, on any given day, somebody is gently bandaging a chicken. Dynasties fall. Tea goes cold. But the chicken gets bandaged. In a place that has watched empire after empire come and go, the animals are the one dynasty that never fell. That instinct isn't only for cats. When the ground itself shook in 2023, ordinary people drove for hours toward the rubble, not away from it, carrying blankets, bread, whatever they had, digging beside the rescue teams with their bare hands. There's a word the people here use for it: vicdan, conscience, the reflex to run towards someone in trouble instead of past them. You can lose an empire and keep that. They did. And the patron saint of that open heart rests in the middle of the country, in Konya. 800 years ago, a poet named Mevlana Rumi wrote 4 lines the whole world now quotes. Come, come, whoever you are. Wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come, yet again, come. Come as you are. There is room. That is the oldest recipe in this country. And here's the thing about an open door. Sometimes the guest stays a while. The old rule says a visit should be short, but when the guest's house is on fire, Anatolia doesn't point them back toward the flames. The visit runs long, because the host doesn't set the return date. The war back home does. And until that date comes, there's a plate, a place, and a glass of tea. And it all lands on one table. A Turkish breakfast is not a meal, it's a negotiation you will lose. A dozen little dishes and the unbreakable rule that a guest must never leave hungry. You'll say you're full, they'll bring more. This is the warmth that survived every collapse. The door open, the kettle on, always room at the table for one more. Every empire that ruled this land eventually packed up and left. The tea stays hot, the table stays set, the cats stay in charge. Let's set the recipe aside, because there's one chapter of this story that has nothing to do with money, and it says the most about this place. In 1915, during the First World War, a vast Allied fleet tried to force its way through the straits and was stopped on a narrow peninsula called Gallipoli, in Turkish, Çanakkale. The fighting lasted 8 months. It cost the Allies more than 140,000 casualties, among them young men from Australia and New Zealand who had sailed to the other side of the world to fight here. The Ottoman side lost even more, over 250,000. One of the bloodiest standoffs of the war. And for the defenders, in a long century of losses, the one battle they won outright. And then, something almost unthinkable happened. The dead lay between the trenches in numbers too great to bear. So, on the 24th of May, 1915, both sides stopped. For one day, enemies climbed out of their trenches together, unarmed, and buried each other's sons side by side. The only formally agreed ceasefire of the entire World War. Then they went back to their lines, and the war went on. The man who held that ground was a soldier the whole world would come to respect. At Gallipoli, he stopped the invasion of an empire. When that empire collapsed, and the victors drew up a treaty to carve his homeland into pieces, a treaty called Sèvres, he tore it up. He led a war of independence, drove the occupying armies back into the sea, and forced the great powers to sign a different peace at Lausanne. And in 1923, on what was left, he founded a republic. The world would know him as Ataturk, the father of the Turks. So remember who is speaking, not a poet, not a diplomat, the general who beat the Allied fleet. In 1934, with the war long over, the words he is honored for were carried to the families of the very men who had died invading his shore. Not the boast of a victor, but a father speaking to other grieving parents. They are inscribed in stone at Anzac Cove and on the Ataturk memorials in Canberra and Wellington, half a world away. Listen to them. Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmeds to us, where they lie side by side, here in this country of ours. You, the mothers, who sent your sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well. Read that again, slowly. The man who won the battle told the enemy's mothers to dry their tears, because their boys were his sons now too. On the soil where it had won, this country built and still keeps the cemeteries of the men who came to invade it, and every spring it welcomes their grandchildren back as guests to mourn. The host who, even in victory, set a place at the table for the fallen, and for the mothers who would never see them again. That same man left this country one sentence to live by: peace at home, peace in the world. He died at 9:05 in the morning on the 10th of November, 1938. And to this day, every year at that exact minute, the whole country stops. Sirens sound, cars pull over on the highways, drivers step out. Millions of people, all at once, stand still and fall silent, for 1 minute, for a man who taught them that you can win and still choose mercy. That is the thing the spreadsheets always miss. This was never just the richest kitchen on earth. It was the most generous one.
So come back to where we started. The empire's kitchen did go broke. The Public Debt Administration was the proof. But that was the empire. Watch what the people built on its ashes. This kitchen has never had it easy with money. Prices still climb faster here than almost anywhere, and the people feel every lira of it. But here's the part the headlines skip. Remember Argentina a few episodes back? A country that went bankrupt on its own debt 9 separate times. 9. This kitchen, for all its trouble, never did. Through war, through crisis, through prices that doubled, it kept paying its way and kept its doors open. The currency shook. The table stayed set. Because a country isn't held up by its currency. It's held up by the spine of the people who refuse to leave the table, who get up the next morning, light the stove, and feed everyone anyway. That's the real recipe for survival. Not that nothing goes wrong, but that however hard it gets, somebody still puts the tea on. And that secret ingredient we left blank at the start? We can name it now. It was never the spices, or the silver, or the empire. It was the open door. The instinct to set one more place at the table, for the merchant, the traveler, the stranger, even the enemy's son. Turkiye lost a lot of recipes over 3,000 years. It never lost that one. And maybe, watching this, you weren't really thinking about Turkiye at all. You were thinking about the table you grew up at, the one with always a little too much food and always room for one more. That's Turkiye, the richest kitchen on earth and the warmest. Until next time, pull up a chair and enjoy your meal. There's a place for you at this table, on this search for the soul of the world. Join us. Subscribe. The next recipe is already on the stove. Next time, we light Japan's kitchen. The perfect recipe, the fullest table on earth, and the empty chairs of children who never came. How does perfection slowly go cold? Japan. Next.